let's talk about authorization. It's that invisible gatekeeper inside every single application, deciding who gets to do what. And if you're a developer, you know that when you try to build this stuff from scratch, well, it almost always ends up as a complex, tangled mess. Today, we're going to untangle it. Okay, let's get real for a second. Think about the projects you're working on right now. Is your permission logic just scattered across a dozen different microservices? Is it hard-coded right into your application, making every tiny change a massive headache? If you're nodding along right now, trust me, you are not alone. We call this the authorization maze. It's a place pretty much every development team has had to navigate, and it is full of all these common traps and anti-patterns that just slow everybody down. And the frustrating part is how universal these problems are. I mean, we've all seen it, right? You've got logic spread out all over the place, which leads to totally inconsistent rules. You have permissions literally hard-coded in the app, so changing a simple role means you have to do a full deployment. And then, when the security team comes by and asks for an audit, oh, it's a complete nightmare. All of this just adds up to a huge bottleneck that stops you from shipping new features. So how do we get out of this maze? Well, this is where OpenFGA steps into the picture. The best way to think about it is like a central brain for all of your authorization decisions, designed specifically to bring some order to all that chaos. So what is this thing really? Well, OpenFGA is an open source project. It's actually part of the CNCF now, and it's heavily inspired by Google's legendary internal system called Zanzibar. Its entire reason for being is to decouple your authorization logic from your application code. You stop asking, can this user do this inside your app, and instead, you just ask this dedicated, specialized service.
And what's the real payoff here? Well, centralizing gives you one source of truth and one place to log every decision, which, believe me, makes auditors very happy. Standardizing means every team, every service is speaking the exact same language for permissions. And the big one for developers, velocity. You can change incredibly complex permission rules just by updating your model without having to redeploy your entire application. It's a game changer.
Now, to really get it, you kind of have to understand how OpenFGA thinks, and it's actually surprisingly simple. It all boils down to just 3 core concepts.
So how does this whole thing work? It's really just 3 simple pillars. First, your application asks a question. To answer that question, OpenFGA looks at the facts that it has stored. And to make sense of those facts, it uses a set of rules. Question, facts, and rules. That's it. That's the whole system.
Let's start with pillar number 1, the question. This is what your application is going to be asking OpenFGA over and over and over again. It's the most fundamental interaction you'll have. And that question, or check, looks something like this. It's a really clear, structured query. Who, what action, and on what resource? Can user N be a reader of document Z? The entire system is built from the ground up to give you a blazing fast, reliable yes or no answer to that question. Okay, so how does it know the answer? It looks at the facts. And these facts are stored as something called relationship tuples. A tuple is really just a single atomic statement of fact. It says user N is a reader of document Z. You write these little facts to OpenFGA to build a map of your entire permissions world. But wait, what does reader even mean? That's where the rules come in, and they live in your authorization model. The model is basically your schema. It's the rulebook. It says things like, a document can have readers and writers, and a user can be a reader. It's the blueprint that gives all your facts their structure and meaning.
All right, so that's the theory. Question, facts, rules. Let's see how this actually applies to something we all have to deal with day to day, user rules. With OpenFGA, you've got a few different ways to model rules, and each one comes with its own trade-offs. The absolute simplest way is relations as roles. This is perfect for those built-in static roles, like admin. If you need your users to create their own custom roles at, say, an organization level, you might go for the middle approach. And for the most flexibility, like making someone an admin of just one specific project, you'd use role assignments. You just pick the approach that makes the most sense for what your app needs to do.
So the key takeaway here is really this trade-off between simplicity and power. Static roles are defined right in your model. They're simple, they're super fast, they're easy to understand. Dynamic roles, on the other hand, are defined with data, with those tuples we talked about, which gives your users the power to customize things. It's a bit more complex, but way more powerful. Honestly, the best practice is usually a hybrid. Use static roles for the ones you know you'll always have, and then add dynamic roles if your application needs that flexibility.
Now let's level up. We're going to get into some really high-value tips for running this thing in the real world. This is the stuff that separates a basic setup from a truly production-grade one. I love this quote. I heard it in a talk about migrating to OpenFGA. It's this perfect reminder that while you can just create tons and tons of tuples for every little permission, a really elegant model that uses relationships and inheritance cleverly will always perform better and be way easier to manage than just brute forcing everything with millions of individual facts.
Okay, here it is, the single most important production tip I can give you. When your services make a check against OpenFGA, they should always specify one single known authorization model ID. So why is that so critical? Well, 3 big reasons. First, performance. OpenFGA doesn't have to waste time looking up the latest model. It knows exactly which one you mean. Second, consistency. All of your microservices are absolutely guaranteed to be using the exact same set of rules. And most importantly, safety. If you accidentally push a bad model update, it doesn't immediately break production because your services are still pinned to the last known good ID. You can then roll out the new ID carefully and deliberately. Here's another key architectural point. What data should actually live inside OpenFGA? It is the perfect source of truth for your fine-grained permissions. Things like who a document is shared with or who's a member of what role. But it should not be your source of truth for user profile data or your main application data. That stuff belongs in your identity provider and your primary application database.
All right, let's talk about the big one, the elephant in the room. How do you build a search bar that only shows results the current user is actually allowed to see? This is a notoriously hard problem to solve in any system that has this kind of granular permission model. There are a few common strategies. You could search your database first, then loop through the results and check each one with OpenFGA, but that gets really slow with large result sets. Or you could flip it, ask OpenFGA for all the object IDs a user can see, then use that list to filter your search. But that can be slow if a user has access to thousands of things. The real pro tip is what's called pragmatic filtering. You use other data you already have, like a tenant ID, to drastically shrink the search space before you even think about checking permissions. That simple pre-filtering step often makes the other strategies fast enough for production.
So we've seen how centralizing your logic can transform that tangled mess into a clean, scalable, and auditable system. The real question isn't just if you're ready to start, but what could you and your team build if you never had to worry about a permissions bottleneck ever again?